Hello, and thank you for joining today's informational webinar on the Rural Leadership Bootcamp Grant. This webinar will be recorded and will be posted on the website for the duration of the application period. We will have an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end of the webinar. You're welcome to drop your questions in the chat kind of as they come to you, or at the end of the webinar, you will be able to unmute yourself and ask your question live. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the timeline for the application, provide a program overview of the Rural Leadership Bootcamp Grant, and then talk a little bit about the scoring rubric and applications, and then finally, as mentioned, open it up for questions. So first, the application is currently open on iowagrants.gov. The deadline is September 1st, 2022 at 11:59 p.m. Funding notification decisions will be sent out no later than September 30th of 2022. And then the funding period officially starts October 1st of this year and then runs through June 30th of 2024. Worth noting for this program specifically is that a requirement for all grantees is to bring a 3-person team to the Leadership Bootcamp. It's a little bit of the points of the program, which I will talk about on the next slide, as well as attending the Leadership Exchange. Those two events are October 20th and 21st of this year, and they will be taking place in Carroll, Iowa. So something to keep in mind as you are looking at the application and considering your involvement in this process is your availability and the availability of your team to participate in the exchange and the boot camp. So this program really came about through the Governor's Empower Rural Iowa initiative. If you're familiar with that initiative, it is made up of 3 task forces: Grow, Invest, and Connect. The Grow task force was focused in on how to foster and support rural leadership development. Over a couple of years of them talking to other leadership programs, kind of discussing what would be the best approach for kind of the state to be supporting rural leadership, was first to relaunch a program that ABI used to do, which is now the Leadership Exchange event. And that is an annual convening of leadership programs to learn from each other. There also was this interest in actually starting a leadership program that is statewide. However, we found that there are so many successful programs across the state, as well as a couple statewide programs that we did not want to recreate the wheel. So instead, we developed this program to encourage local communities, counties, regions to develop their own leadership programs to help foster leadership within their spaces. So that was where this came about. This program, while it is a grant, is really a lot more than a grant. You'll see on the next slide that the grant award is relatively small. However, it does include that day-wide boot camp that I mentioned, where you really will be walked through each of the steps that it takes to create a leadership program from the ground up. That includes everything from the mission to then engaging alumni afterwards and everything in between. We talk about budgets, we talk about speakers, we talk about programming. You'll hear from leaders from across the state. You are also going to be partnered with a mentor who will walk with you for about a year to help answer any questions, to provide guidance, recommendations, or to connect you with others as necessary. So it's really kind of those pieces, that training piece, that mentorship piece, and then finally the funding that compose this full program. Also want to mention that, and I already said this once and I will say it a few more times, it is a 3-person team that is required to participate in the boot camp event itself. So the boot camp is on October 21st. It is in Carroll, and each applicant, each grantee will need to bring 3 people. And we do encourage that to be a diverse team of stakeholders who will be involved in the leadership program. They don't need to necessarily be those that will be running it, but maybe the ideal audience member. Maybe that's who you would want to invite because that's a person that you want to ensure is involved. I'll get into that a little bit later, but it's worth repeating because that's really a key piece to this program. Funding, as I mentioned, is a relatively small award, a $1,000 grant award with a required 500 cash match. This funding is intended to help be kind of a launch pad for your program. A lot of leadership programs don't actually require a whole lot of startup funding, but things such as room rental space, or maybe food for some of the meetings, or a speaker, if you want to bring in a speaker, things like that would be eligible expenses. And then, as I mentioned before, the other benefits. You do receive that free registration to the Leadership Exchange. The Leadership Exchange has a small registration fee of $50 per person, but that is waived for the whole 3-person team for each of the grantees. And then I did mention the 1 year of mentorship. We will be partnering you with that person, that other expert who has experience in leadership development. This is a reimbursement grant. So you would need to spend the grant award and the match upfront and submit a reimbursement claim for that amount in order to be reimbursed for the $1,000 grant. All of that is done through Iowa Grants. The claims need to include an invoice of what the money was spent on, proof of payment, that can be everything from a receipt to a canceled check, and then a status report of kind of how things are going with your leadership program development. There are also some reporting requirements. So the quarterly reports, the first one for this program will be in January of 2023, and that will cover the period from October through December of this year. The quarterly reports are really not intended to be overly cumbersome. They are meant to just be a touch base. Are things on track? Are you needing help with anything? Do you anticipate having trouble reaching any of the deadlines? Things like that. It's just a way for us to make sure that there isn't anything that we need to be aware of. The final report is a little bit more robust. That, again, within Iowa Grants, should include the summary of the project, the photos, if there's any news articles. You will also include in there if you were unable to spend any of the funds for whatever reason, you would need to include that in your final report. And that would need to be submitted before we're able to kind of close out your whole contract. The population requirements are the same for all of our programs within the Center for Rural Revitalization, and that is that the program must exist and benefit a city in Iowa with a population of 2,000 or fewer and not contiguous or sharing a common border with a city that has a population of 40,000 or greater. If it is a county-wide program, then it must be in one of the 88 least populous counties in Iowa. It's probably worth noting, and this is all, we're talking about the grant here. The Leadership Exchange, while it is aimed at rural as well and is hosted by the Center for Rural Revitalization, is open to anyone. So urban communities are welcome to join the exchange, but the boot camp and this grant is limited only to rural communities and rural areas that meet these population requirements. Finally, the applicants must be a city or county government or a federally tax-exempt nonprofit. Selection considerations. So these are the areas that the review panel considers when they are reviewing the applications. Each of these ties directly into the application questions that we're going to get to in a second, but gives you an idea of kind of the full scope of what we're addressing. So this program is a little bit different than many of our others. We do not actually have a traditional scoring rubric. And we do also not anticipate this to necessarily be a competitive grant program in the traditional sense where we are only awarding, say, 5. Instead, this is more of a kind of a readiness criteria. So the panels are reviewing based on this list on if they think the community or the organization that is applying is prepared to complete this process. So it's a little bit more of a yes, no. They go through all these questions and determine yes, no based on the application responses. And if the responses are yes, then the application is accepted and brought to the executive director for final approval. I know there's a lot of text on this slide. All of this information is available in the program guidelines, which are on the website. So now we're going to jump into what the application questions are and talk a little bit about what kind of response would be expected. So participation, this is fairly basic, but it's kind of talking about why now, why you think your community or your organization or your region is ready and needing to start a leadership program now. An interesting component of this program is that it's not required necessarily to be a brand new grant program. We had a few applicants last year who either had an existing program that had kind of gone stale and they wanted to completely revamp it, or a old program that had gone dormant for any number of years, and they wanted to relaunch it with kind of a fresh approach, a fresh mission. So those are both appropriate as well. The grant cannot fund kind of a existing, healthy, productive grant or leadership program. That's not the intent. This boot camp is really trying to help structure those programs. So a complete rework or a relaunch works just as well as a new development, but a kind of continuation of an existing program would not be eligible. Just something to keep in mind. Program description. So this essentially is kind of talking about if you've had leadership programs in the past, if you've done any prep work on knowing what kind of program you want. Usually most communities have at least some idea. For example, I mean, you could come in saying, hey, I want the boot camp to really help guide this conversation and determine what kind of program we have. That's fine. But we do anticipate that most programs will know that maybe they want a youth-focused program. That's good to know. If that's your goal, that should be included here, that it's a youth program. If it is a kind of a civic leadership type program, that's something you should mention. So we're not necessarily needing very specific details. We anticipate that for many, that will be worked out during the process with the boot camp, with the mentor, but just kind of any general work that has been done or any past work that existed. As with all projects and programs, the partners at the table are really important. So this is an opportunity for applicants to share who is responsible for the program, which partners are at the table, kind of who's been involved in this discussion. And that leads right into the attending team. So they don't necessarily need to be the same. In fact, I did recommend many of the applicants or the grantees last year to not only have people who are going to be administering or leading the program to be those that attend. It actually is kind of beneficial to have at least one that is a little bit more of an outsider, that maybe is that target audience person, to give their perspective on things that they think would be useful in a leadership program. So that's something to keep in mind, but you do need to identify your 3 people in the application. There is, I mean, it's a month and a half between when the application deadline and the October 21st boot camp. If you need to swap out a name, you're able to work with me on that. That's totally fine. But we do want to at least make sure that you have 3 people confirmed that they are going to attend the event in Carroll. Participation goals. Some of this might be pretty obvious, want to help develop a leadership program, but we also want to know if there's kind of any specific needs. If you're anticipating needs specific to, say, funding or long-term sustainability or engagement after the program, or trying to develop the appropriate length of the program, just especially if you are in a community or an organization that has tried and maybe struggled with launching a program in the past. Include here kind of what those questions are, what those needs are, so that we have a better idea and we can better shape how we are providing assistance during the boot camp itself. Sustainability, I did kind of just touch on that, but again, it's not a huge grant program, but it is $1,000. So it would be good to be able to indicate how you plan to sustain this program moving forward. If there is maybe the program is going to be sponsored by the city or the chamber or some other organization. This is where you would include that information to talk about how you plan for this to continue into the second, third, fourth, 10th year. Budget, this is a pretty simple section, especially given that this is a very small or a relatively small grant program. So the requested amount, that would be $1,000, is an $1,000 grant. The cash match needs to be at least 500. If you have more than that, that has been allocated to this program development and implementation, you are welcome to increase that amount, but it must be at least that 500. Supplemental project cost is anything that cannot count as match or be used for grant funds. So things like in kind. So if there's anyone who's donating their time or any speakers who are donating their time or space, that could be included there. Or if you had costs done beforehand, or if you're anticipating them after the contract period, that would be included there as well. Also totally fine to put 0. And then total project cost is the sum of those 3. The source of matching funds is a upload requirement. So you will need to upload likely a PDF of either maybe if it's the city that's providing the match, a city resolution, a letter from a CEO or president or CFO that says that we have the funding for to support match for this program, or even a bank statement that shows that the money is there. And then use of funds, you might not know all of this, and that's okay. I will say that it is an eligible expense to pay for your gas mileage and hotel to Carroll as part of your use of funds. So you could always make that a line item as travel to the boot camp. If you know ahead of time that the space you're going to want is going to cost a certain amount, you could put that in there. If you don't, it's okay to be relatively vague and say that the funding will be utilized for, the implementation of the leadership program, or, to host 4 leadership meetings or something like that is fine. We understand that some of the use of funds will not be determined until after you have actually kind of created the program. And finally, the letters of support. This is significant. I would go back and look at who you listed as your partners for that question, and maybe ask them to develop a letter of support. This just shows that community buy-in, community support, which is such an important piece when you're trying to launch a leadership program, to kind of show that you have that backing. And again, it's just a file upload here, so you can upload a PDF of combined letters if that's easiest. So that's actually it as far as the application for this one. Again, it is a fairly simple application, and it is not necessarily competitive, again, in the traditional sense. So it is mostly a demonstration of commitment, of enthusiasm for the development of this type of leadership program. Maybe an indication that you have either attended an exchange in the past, or maybe met with someone else who leads a leadership program, just that kind of understanding of what this will involve and willingness to kind of move that ball forward and develop that program. So at this time, I'm happy to take any questions you might have. You can either drop them in the chat or just unmute yourself. One thing I do want to mention is if you are considering applying for this program, we are planning to open registration for the exchange mid-August, but if you are awarded a grant, you actually don't need to register and pay that fee. As I mentioned, it is part of your grant is free registration. So If you are planning to apply, either contact me or just don't register yet, because we do not have the ability to refund your money. So while we would like to, if we could, we can't. So please do not register if you are planning to apply for the Rural Leadership Bootcamp and also want to attend the exchange, because if you are awarded, you will be able to attend. Any questions? Okay, well, thank you again for your interest in the program. I look forward to your applications. You are welcome to send me any email or phone call questions you have, and this will be recorded and posted on the website. So thank you all again for joining, and have a great rest of your day.